Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. And I'm delighted to have Neha with us today. I'm your host, Dr. Christopher Liu. And as you know, I talk about four different types of freedom: time, financial, location, and health freedom. And in that light, I'm always scouring the globe, looking for people on the cutting edge, making a difference. So today, Neha, she's a Y Combinator tech recruiter. So we're going to talk all about Y Combinator, metrics oriented, Forbes Business Council. It's going to be a fantastic discussion about tech entrepreneurs, AI. I'm just fascinated with tech, the ability for it to change the world. So, Neha, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you to the listeners. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I know we had connected through Podmatch, and tell us the audience more about your background and your story, and we'll get right into it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So my name is Neha Naik. I live in Houston, Texas, with my husband and two young kids. Initially, growing up, I aspired to be a physician, and then in med school, I realized that it wasn't for me. But I have a lot of respect for all of you who go through it. I know it's an incredibly challenging career path, and I feel like your heart really has to be there to serve others. So I am, really thankful and respectful for all that you do and sacrifice for us, right? So that we can be healthy. And so basically from there, I started working as a recruiter for a couple of companies. Ultimately ended up finding my own business about 8 years ago, only because I felt like I could do more. I could have the financial freedom and just be a present mom. That was something that was a top priority for me after having kids. And I felt like having a business would allow me to work with the clients I wanted to work with, work the hours I wanted to work with, and still go for Mother's Day brunch, when my kids want me to be there.
Yeah, I love that. We could talk all day about healthcare. Uh, is it worth it and all of that? It's really interesting. Let's get right into it. So you basically, your tech and tell, for example, your experience with being a Y Combinator tech recruiter. What do you do, and how you help clients and all of that.
Yeah, good question. So basically, my role as a Y Combinator tech recruiter within my clients' businesses is to, one, act as part of their business, even though I'm coming in as an agency and a contractor, and really help them scale their business efficiently without the burnout, right? So a lot of times, especially with tech companies, you'll see that they're either bootstrapped or profitable, or they're raising funds so that they can, start hiring people for their team and take that, product or service to the next level, right? And then ultimately either go IPO or sell the business to another business. And so my goal is when they hire me to come up with an org chart to make sure that we're hiring the right people at the right time, and then work with them and make sure that when we do talk to candidates, we're putting our best first impression system forward, right? Because again, everyone is really picky nowadays on where they want to work, and it's really important to me that when we take on clients like that, then we really honing in on culture and inclusion and some of the other things that are incredibly important for startups, because as you know, turnover in startups can really hurt the business, right? Because you're having to go back and hire, and that person leaves and you're having to go back and hire, and so you're spending then your time on hiring instead of building out your product. So my goal is to increase the retention by my proven hiring methodology.
Yeah, interesting. And we'll talk about work from home, the diversity gap, yeah, also AI. So we're seeing ChatGPT and Bard. What's the role of AI in recruiting and retaining top talent?
Great question. I love that you asked that, because this is obviously on everyone's mind, right? Especially with this new AI thing coming up. So I really think that, I don't think of AI as like a competition, right, to my job, because I think at the end of the day, human resources means there's a human involved, right? And so to me, when I think of recruiting and the addition to AI, AI is there to, I feel like, get rid of all the grunt work. So if you think of resume parsing, reviewing profiles, reviewing resumes, putting together job descriptions, all that, setting up systems, AI is going to be perfectly capable of doing. Now, where I think we do need human beings is to actually talk to candidates and guide hiring managers and founders and co-founders, right? And AI isn't going to be able to emit the culture that you're looking to talk to about to other people, right? Like the AI is not going to be able to like humanize your culture, your values, your mission, your vision. And so for a recruiter, it's how well can we work with AI so that we're automating the processes that are taking up time. And when we do that, we're basically increasing our human bandwidth, right? So instead of talking to now 10 people a day. I can talk to 20 people a day because my AI friend is doing all the things on the back end that I would be doing and spending my time on. So I'm increasing my efficiency, but the AI is helping me out, right? So again, thinking of it as, okay, how do we work well with AI instead of like, oh my gosh, AI is going to take away my job, right? Coming at it from that attitude is really going to help us make really efficient recruiters. And it's also going to allow the companies to scale faster, but also doing it in a very efficient and thoughtful manner.
Yeah, it's AI is a fascinating topic. It's going to be like learning how to use a computer, how to use social media, search, mobile. It's not going to, I guess, well, it's going to displace and change industries, but it's actually the people that know how to use AI that are going to come out ahead. And so it's like I said, it's a fundamental shift in infrastructure. Very fascinating. I love it. And one thing is what is this idea of so this remote and flexible hybrid work setup? They're optimal for the tech industry and how companies should embrace.
Yeah, so I think since the pandemic, we've definitely seen this increase in remote opportunities, right? Because obviously offices were shut down. You couldn't come in anymore because of COVID. And so now what's happened is, since that shift, a lot of people are comfortable with the flexibility because now they can, be home for dinner, drop their kids off to school at a decent hour instead of trying to like beat the traffic. And so I feel like a lot of people are really enjoying that flexibility. And so especially for the tech world, a lot of the roles can be done remotely, right? Like a product designer, product manager, software engineer, web developer, social media marketer. I can, give you a whole list of roles, but a lot of roles can be done technically, right? So it's going to be about changing how you measure the milestone driven output instead of like, are you in from 8 to 5, right? We also know that people work efficiently at different times. So like, my husband is more efficient at night when he does his work, and I'm a morning person. So if I'm not like done with my important priorities by noon, I start to lose that energy, right? And so it's really going to be optimizing on humans as people and really saying everyone's different. And it's okay if you're working from 12 to 8 instead of 8 to 5, as long as the milestones are being met, but they're met in a very good way, right? Like you're not just turning something in, you're turning something in with high quality. And I think that's where you're going to see this entire shift, right? And that means that you can't then have an office that requires people to come in from 8 to 5 because that's not going to be, acceptable to everybody in their way of work, right? Now, obviously, this excludes other roles that can be done remotely. So if you're a doctor, for example, you're a nurse, you got to go see people, right? Like we know there's telemedicine that's come up quite a bit. But at some point, there's going to have to be that physical interaction with the patient, right? But even then, I had an incident where I had to get an x-ray and I went to go get the x-ray and the doctor called me on video and talk to me about the x-ray and the next steps, right? And so we're going to start seeing this incremental shift into, just remote work, not just in the tech industry, but also outside of the tech industry. But yeah, that's kind of, my thoughts on it. And so it's going to be really important to see how enterprise companies, how startup companies pivot, according to the model, because I know a lot of companies are now asking people to come back in, but people are now looking for other jobs because they don't want to go back in. So you're going to see a little bit of turnover, with that that mandatory requirement.
Yeah, like I said, this whole like COVID really accelerated a lot of the shifts in work, and a lot of, especially in tech, you can work from anywhere in the world, anytime, at your own convenience. And one thing is talking about this diversity gap in technology and basically you have this experience, intentional recruiting, hiring, and retention practices. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I think there's diversity. Definitely, there's diversity in the tech industry, and I think it's majority because there's less women, especially since again post COVID. Then you also have racial and cultural diversity. So it's I think it is really about the leadership and the hiring team and the recruiter, right? And so as a team, we have to work towards more diversity. And the reason being is that the more diverse your team is, you're going to have different points of view. And when you have different points of view, you kind of are you have this culture of inclusion and equity, right? And that leads to retention. And retention leads to basically you being very on time with any type of delivery that you have for your product or service, which then leads to more clients, right? And you want to build a culture of diversion, inclusion, and having equity, right? And so I think that starts early on. So even for girls, if you can encourage them to go into engineering or go into tech or STEM, that's going to go a long way, so that we're gonna start seeing those shifts early on. So even as early as elementary school, middle school, high school, making those shifts, because you are shifting a paradigm. So this is not going to shift overnight, right? This is going to be a decade, 2 decades worth of work, but we have to all work together as a community so that ultimately we see more women in tech, more cultural diversity. And the way to encourage that is at the ground up. So, working with your communities to have the programs that really encourage, all these diversity initiatives across whatever it is that you're wanting to do, But I always think 30 years from now, how do you want your schools to look like? How do you want the curriculum to look like? How do you want your community to look like? How do you want the office environment to look like? Whether it's remote or in person, right? And so those are the things that you have to think about when you think of, diversity in the workplace, because the change starts today, right? Like you can't put it off to other generations. Like you have to act on it sooner. So that way it kind of starts seeping into the ground, right? And becomes this whole root with this huge tree. But it starts with a little small sapling.
Yeah, really, really well said. And you talk about this idea of changing dynamics, and a lot of Gen Z and millennials and now Gen Alpha, they're more focused on what values, what resonates with them. So especially post-COVID, establishing a thriving workplace environment is a lot different than what it was 20 years ago. And then you talk about rooted in culture and morale is crucial for businesses. So how do you fit into that picture?
Yeah, so one of the pillars of I have 3 pillars of my business that I really believe in. So the first is the first impression systems. The second is a cohesive culture method. And the third is the compass leadership methodology, right? And so basically the cohesive culture method is all about how do you build a culture where, no matter where you are, you're Gen Z, you're millennial, everybody feels comfortable and everybody feels part of the company, right? Everybody feels part of the mission, the vision, the values. And I think, the best way to do that, right? The best way to inculcate this culture is going to be really to be transparent, to really be growth oriented. And it's going to require a different mindset. It requires this trust mindset, right? This mindset of, I'm going to hire you to do this job, and I'm not going to micromanage you, and I'm going to trust you unless you prove me wrong, unless you're not delivering on time, unless you're not meeting your milestones. But I'll tell you, Chris, a lot of clients that I work with, they don't have that mindset. They want to micromanage, and then they get upset when people leave. And I'm like, you don't have that, you need to have that mindset of, culture positivity. And when you start driving towards that, right? When you're transparent with your team, when you're honest, when you're asking for feedback, when you're providing feedback, when you're doing anonymous surveys so that you can understand where people are struggling, then you can actually take action on those things. If you're just clocking in and saying, what did you do from 8 to 10? What did you do from 10 to 12? That's not really helping anybody, right? It's going to actually drive people to think like, this person doesn't trust me, so I can't be here when I'm not trusted. As human beings, we need to feel safe. We need to feel included. It's a psychological thing, right? If you ever worked in a place where you didn't feel safe, you didn't feel included, and you felt like people were pointing fingers at you, you're not going to be happy there. And the next thing you know, you're going to find another job, right? And we've all gone through that at some point in our lives or another, where we're like, I hate this work. Like, I don't want to work here, right? And so really just kind of going back to that and like, how are you treating your current employees or your team right now? How are you really embracing this cohesive culture and bringing people together instead of pitting people against each other, having that extremely competitive mindset, right? Because at the end of the day, as a company, you have to grow together, not against each other. If you divide people, you're not going to be successful. People are going to leave and you're going to be unhappy, right? So that's kind of my attitude about it, is like really embracing that trust mindset. And it takes time to build, right? Like it's not something that happens overnight, but you have to start building that, because until you do, it's going to be very hard to be that leader that people look up to and want to work for.
Yeah, talking about the corporate culture, a lot of it's there's very few companies that are really truly innovative and really great places to work. I think tech is really is on the cusp of that. But then you also have like these problems with the different teams and different interdepartmental communication breaking down. So what are some key strategies for breaking those down, those silos, improving cohesiveness, dynamic, all of these things within you see within the corporate confines?
Yep, great question. I think the biggest thing is, and you've heard me say this, is transparency. And I think it all starts with your hiring process, right? Like setting up your hiring process where even the people that are going to join you are meeting people from other departments. So if you're hiring someone on the engineering side, then allowing them to meet people on the product side or the design side or the sales side. So I think it really starts, with your hiring process and your onboarding, right? Because it's very easy to get siloed in, right? And being like, okay, I don't need to work with these other teams. But until you again inculcate that culture of cohesiveness, right? And providing anonymous surveys, getting people's feedback, doing all hands on deck meetings. So, once in 4 weeks or once in 6 weeks, getting your entire team together on Zoom if you're remote, right? Planning a quarterly offsite where you invite people to come to cities, and meet and get to know each other and really understand each other, right? I think that's going to be incredible, and it's going to really speak for the company that you are. I myself have seen, just tremendous changes when I've started doing this within my team. There's loyalty. There's this, people want to work harder because they want to make sure the company succeeds, right? And it's not just about them anymore. It's about the vision of the company, and working towards that vision. So really allowing people to do that. There's so many ways you can do it. You can, encourage people to network, meet with people on different teams. Just put 10 minutes on people's calendar. Like, hey, I know you've been here for 2 years. I've been here for 2 years. And I realized we never talked about what we do. Like, I'm putting time on your calendar on Friday right before lunch so we can get to know each other. It can be really something that's simple, right? Like, start networking within your business. If you have a really big team, make it a goal. Like twice a month, I'm going to talk to somebody new in my company that I've never met before. That's like 30 minutes, 15 minutes per person. That's all you need, right? And those 30 minutes are really going to compound. And ultimately, you're going to build a really good network of people within your business that if something comes up, you can say, hey, I know this person and she can answer my question, right? Because I talked to her last month and this is exactly her zone of genius. So yeah, just really having those conversations. And I'll give you an example. I actually did this in my previous company. And one of the people was an interior designer. And so she, she was in sales, but she also did interior design. So when it was time to redecorate our house, I reached out to her and I'm like, hey, I know you're an interior designer. Like, can you work with us to do this? And she ended up working with me on that, so it was really cool. Like we knew each other through work, but then we were able to work with each other outside of work. And I wouldn't have known that unless I took the initiative to talk to her.
Yeah, great discussion. I know a lot of people may be interested in following you, finding out more about you. How can they do that?
Yep, great question. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can look me up, Neha Naik, N-E-A. You can also look up my website. It's Recruit. And then, yeah, I'm on Facebook. So just, again, find me. And yeah, I'm happy to connect and chat with you about anything recruiting.
And for the audience out there, let's thank Neha for coming on. Really interesting ideas and topics, ways of hiring, recruiting, retaining talent, and how she fits into that. Neha's resources will be in the links and show notes. And with that, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to all the listeners. All the best.